Welcome, Dr. Brown. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
I want to check that I have your position right, just to start. I have you as the associate professor of teaching at Ohio State University in the Department of Philosophy. Is that right?
That is correct.
Cool. And what's a teaching professor?
Yeah, good. So this is actually a new kind of position in academia. There's been this problem for a long time where you have your standard tenure track faculty who have a teaching responsibility and a research responsibility. And of course, those are two very different skills, teaching and research. So, sometimes it makes sense for us to focus just on teaching. And historically, that's been to use what some people call, here at Ohio State, we call lecturers. At other places, they call them adjunct professors, which are kind of like semester by semester or year by year contracts. But those are, they're bad. They're bad for the people who do them. There's very little stability in them. They cause a lot of turnover in the department. And so what started happening, especially at large schools like Ohio State, is there are these new kind of teaching intensive professorships that are starting to emerge, which are more stable than a lectureship, better paying than a lectureship, but also still without research responsibilities. So yeah, I teach 4-ish classes per semester. I have about 500 or 600 students these days. I do have some, service responsibilities here. I'm helping with teaching evaluation. I helped with recruitment a little bit last year, and I help run a summer camp that we do over the summer for high school students. And I have like recurring 5-year contracts that are sort of tenure-like when they're in the middle of them. So as long as I don't misbehave, then I get to keep my contract, and then hopefully I'm continuing to show my value to the department every 5 years, and then they'll renew my contract. So interestingly, for this kind of stuff, it frees up. Well, it's kind of challenging for thinking about the stuff that I've been working on lately, this UFO alien kind of stuff, because I don't have any research responsibilities, I can just kind of play with it as I will. But it also means I don't have a ton of time. But yeah, anyways, that's what a teaching professorship is.
Okay, cool. And I've got you with a BA from University of Pittsburgh, 2004, and your PhD from Ohio State University in 2012. And I wanted to ask, what was that in?
In philosophy, yeah. So undergrad, I was double majoring physics and philosophy. It took me 5 years to complete my degree. So for the first 4 years, I was double majoring. And then I realized this is, it's going to take me too long. I was talking to you before we started recording. I have several children at that point. I had 4 when I was graduating from, only 3 when I was graduating from my undergraduate degree.
Only 3. That's no problem.
Yeah, I know. A mere 3. And now I have 7 for those of you who are just coming in. So I decided to drop the physics degree. My last semester as a physics major was really, really wonderful because I was taking 20th century physics in the physics department, quantum mechanics and relativity and stuff like that. And then I was taking philosophy of 20th century physics in the philosophy department. And so it was really neat to see it from both of those angles. And then it just became clear to me, okay, I'm really more interested in the philosophical questions, and I don't want to keep doing, Calc 5 and Calc 6. And I'm tired of learning all the math that I need for this. So I'm
through Calc 4. That's extremely difficult. It sounds difficult to me anyway.
It was fun, but there's part of me that misses it. My 4th son is now going to be a freshman here at Ohio State this year. He's going into aerospace engineering. So I sat down in the engineering orientation the other day, and I was a little bit jealous of the kinds of STEM classes that he gets to do. I do miss that stuff to some extent.
Cool. Yeah, I can see you being jealous because when he graduates, he's going to work at Lockheed and he's going to actually experiment on these UFOs.
Look, he's here at the opportune moment, because if everything goes according to plan, then yeah, he can be among the first generation of normal human engineers to get to work with our neighbors.
That's pretty exciting. I saw a Boeing ad recently that said, like, come work on the future with an aerospace vehicle that looks suspiciously like a flying saucer. Seemed like a troll / a slight promise, maybe.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of weird stuff like that happening. Like there was that Super Bowl commercial that had all of the UFO alien stuff in it.
Yeah, I think it was an Oliver Stone commercial, maybe.
Yeah.
We're in Scorsese. Yeah,
right.
City, and he's looking up.
But somebody else pretty important directed that video. I forget who it was, but
I think it was Scorsese, but I could be wrong. Maybe.
Yeah, no, Scorsese was the guy in the video.
In it, but maybe he didn't. Okay.
Anyways, it was great. Yeah. So there's weird stuff, as you know. In many senses, there are weird things in the air. There are literally weird things in the air, and there are weird things in the air, culturally speaking, at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. It's very zeitgeisty. So we'll start getting toward it a little bit. I just wanted to say thank you for your sharp, fun, clear work on this subject.
Thank you.
I've been watching a bunch of it, and I'm going to recommend that people check out your YouTube channel and your interviews specifically on the That UFO podcast, which is kind of the premier UFO podcast, in my opinion.
Except for this one, of course.
It's what was that? Sorry?
Except for this one. Like, this one's the next up and coming.
Happy to live in the shadow of great accounts because, like you, I'm fairly new to this. Like, I don't know why it never really cracked through my brain's egg. Even when the videos dropped in 2017, I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. But then David Grush and that year and hearing David Fravor describe the Tic Tac for me was like a lightning bolt that then catalyzed all this other stuff that'd been waiting to become an actual interest. And so I think we maybe had a similar journey of the last year, like ontological shock and intense research and scrambling curiosity.
Yeah.
So I wanted to send people to those places because I'm going to try not to retread too much ground. And I wanted to start by offering you the opportunity to share any recent developments in your thinking if you would like to do that. And also to ask about your ontological shock and just say, how you doing on a personal level?
Oh, I love this. Yeah. So, updates. So these days I kind of have two fronts, right? Like, I mean, I have my family who I love and take a lot of my time and attention, and I have my teaching who I love and take a lot of my time and attention. And I'm trying very hard to make sure that those two projects are deeply addressed before I spend too much time on the other things. But the other two projects are I'm working with Danny Sheehan and the New Paradigm Institute to do essentially to kind of think about how to elevate the academic discussion of these topics. There's been some attempts, right? Like New Paradigm is running some classes with Ubiquity University, which is an online university. And those are good introductions to kind of the history and the kind of serious, important implications of what seems to be going on. But there's a degree of like high academic rigor and like serious research in traditional academic institutions that is beginning to emerge. I think the premier example of this is the Soul Foundation. Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish. And I think that's kind of, and then there's other things like Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project and things of that sort. There's several organizations emerging right now, and it's just this exciting moment because as it's good to hear that you and I are kind of on a similar timeline. I was talking to Peter Skafish the other day, and he was kind of talking to me about how he's been doing this for a very long time, and he was like, gosh, it really takes like 5 years to really understand what's going on, and it might take you 20 years to fully absorb what's happening. And I said to him, well, look, I hear you, like I really do, but as things become kind of more and more apparent, easier for people to see, there are these waves of people going through ontological shock, and which we need to talk about what that is and what I'm doing about that, or what we're doing about that in a moment. But like David Grush was a really big deal. And if I had to recommend one of the videos on my YouTube channel, it would be the one about David Grush. I have these other things about the Nazca mummies. I think the Nazca mummies are fascinating. They're very, very complicated, and getting the Nazca mummies right is extremely difficult, especially right now for a whole variety of reasons. But I have this other video on the David Grush stuff, which basically says it's irrational to ignore what's going on in the government of the United States, given how many high-level individuals in the Senate and in the executive branch and in the House are really taking this very seriously. And so we, as an educated electorate, also need to be taking it very seriously. I think I went off on several simultaneous chains of thought there. But in a nutshell, there's been this wave caused by David Grush of a lot of very highly educated, very serious, research-oriented people who are now taking it very seriously. And so there needs to be a kind of community and a kind of pipeline into that community for people as they're becoming aware of this. So there's a group that we just call NPI Academics, New Paradigm Institute Academics. There's about 20-ish of us right now. It grows slowly kind of by word of mouth and various people who we know and, people who are approaching us through the New Paradigm Institute website and stuff. So that little community, like we're talking about some stuff, we're working on some projects. But for us, many of us have expressed that the primary value of that is just having a community of people who have serious academic research backgrounds, and who have that kind of mindset, right? Who are like, well, so when I was talking to Skafish the other day, he was like, I think when it becomes apparent to people, most people are just going to go, wow, I guess there's aliens, right? But the academics aren't like that, right? The academics, when they flip, they go like, okay, so I guess I didn't understand the history of at least the last 70 or 80 years, and maybe longer than that. And gosh, maybe that impacts my physics. Maybe that impacts my philosophy of religion. Maybe that impacts my ethics, and maybe that impacts my political history and my political theory. And dear God, like I have a lot of work to do. and so there is this wave of people who came in with Grush, and I think there will be more and more waves coming in. Right, Elizondo's book comes out next week, and I fully expect that will trigger another wave. I don't know how to compare that with the Grush wave. And allegedly, there's these rumors that we're going to see more and more whistleblowers, potentially some whistleblowers first-handers who have been working in these programs, maybe by the end of this year. And if that happens, then there's big waves coming, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've really been thinking about a lot and working hard with some of my colleagues is talking about the tipping point, right? Because at some point it has to, when we talk about paradigm shift, right? A paradigm shift is like a whole kind of normalized way of thinking and practicing. And when paradigms change, they don't change gradually. Like they kind of destabilize for a while and then they flip all at once, right? Mm-hmm. And we're in that destabilization phase right now, where people like me, like you, like these people who I'm talking to, are starting to realize that the way we've been thinking about the world is wrong. Some of us have started thinking about what that means, but at some point, historically speaking, relatively soon, like in my view, I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe a little longer than that. I would say probably no more than a decade. Something will happen, right? A whistleblower or the president says something, or for heaven's sake, a spaceship hovers over the White House and just stays there. Mm-hmm. If something like that happened, then everybody flips, right? And that moment when the big paradigm shift happens, when the kind of status quo worldview catches up, is going to be a traumatizing and shocking moment, right? Mm-hmm. So like people describe this experience. You've already described it this way. I describe it this way. There's this term that we're using, ontological shock, right? Which is like this realization. Ontological, of course, has to do with the nature of being and existence, right? And the reason people call it ontological shock is because once you realize that these things need to be taken seriously, you call into question so many things about your whole worldview that it's kind of unlike anything else. And we're actually working this NPI academics group there's a subgroup of this made of about half a dozen of us who are trying to do some research on ontological shock. And there's already some survey work and stuff being done out there I think what we're going to do is begin with just kind of interviewing each other and trying to put together a kind of narrative analysis of our experiences and how they reflect other people's experiences in going through this change, because it's very, very important, right? Like when it happens at scale, everything changes at once. So my friend Helen McCaw, who recently published a paper through Soul Foundation about financial implications of disclosure, right? This term that people are using to talk about when it becomes clear to the majority that something is happening. And Helen's concerns are economic, right? So her background is in finance, and she wrote this paper about banking systems and financial systems and how they might be impacted. And that really caught the attention of a lot of policy people who weren't paying any attention before, right? Like, oh, geez, like if this becomes more and more apparent to people and lots of people go through ontological shock at once, that's going to shock the economy. It's going to shock the political system. It's going to shock the psychological well-being of all of us at once. And that's something that we, like, to some extent, you can't plan for that. Like, it's we will be caught flat-footed to some extent. But to whatever degree we can anticipate some of that, the better off we're going to be.
That was a great intro, and you're totally right. To some extent, it helps that it's trickling out a little bit now. And something I was thinking about was, like, these are the reasons that they've been, the people who know more about this than we do have been so loath to express that information for so long. Reasonably so. I read, I don't know if you've dabbled in this, but side recommendation, the Phil Corso book, The Day After Roswell, is really interesting.
I've not read it, but I'm familiar with it.
It's, it's weird and shrug, question mark, but, we know he did work at the Pentagon, at the White House. So one of the, like, fascinating little tidbits that jumped out for me was that they had this conversation allegedly about the cover-up, and somebody suggested, maybe people's natural curiosity will respond to the cover-up in a way that creates a kind of slow disclosure. So they were, theoretically, from Corso's point of view, they were kind of counting on people's curiosity to help leak this out in a way that defrayed some of that jarring ontological shock you just described. Yeah. I'm really excited to learn about the NPI academics, and I'm looking forward to checking them out. That made me think the invisible college is becoming visible. Jack always...
Man, that should be our tagline. All right, from now on, that's our tagline. The invisible college is becoming... Thank you.
Nice.
I will credit you for the tagline from now on.
You're very welcome. The visible college. Congratulations.
Let me say a little bit about what you kind of hinted at a moment ago about why this is being hidden and the degree to which there might be some kind of an expectation or maybe even a plan about disclosure. I don't know, unless you wanted to talk about that later. Do you want?
If it's cool with you, actually, I would love to do 3 chunks here. I'd like to do epistemology, then the phenomenon, then in curiosity / the cover-up. Yeah, so maybe we can swoop around and do that. We'll eat our vegetables first here.
I'll put the pin in it. Here we go.
Nice, thank you. So this might be more dry, but it's also...
Oh, please go.
A wonky, like, philosophy fan for me, like, kind of an exciting part, because I have enough, like, reading and training to think about thinking a little bit, but I'm not an expert and you are. So I'm excited to hear some of your takes about just, like, how to process this information carefully and thoughtfully. So I thought just generally I could ask to start, could you please tell us about some general tools that epistemologists use to think about subjects like UFOs, about which we don't have strong scientific consensus. And I was thinking maybe you could explain the concept of mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive dichotomies, if you think that's a good example.
Yeah, great. Let's do that. So, okay. So first of all, for those who aren't familiar with the kind of structure of academic philosophy, just to be annoying, the question of what philosophy is itself a question in philosophy. Like, we don't really know what philosophy is because we kind of don't know what anything is to some extent, or rather all of it is kind of under analysis and in dispute all the time, right?
Classic philosophy.
Yeah, which is funny, right? Like, that's actually called metaphilosophy when you're doing philosophy about what philosophy is. And there's at least one, there's actually a small literature of papers on meta-philosophy, which is asking what metaphilosophy is. Yeah, that'll tell you everything you need to know about philosophy. But I like to say, and some of my colleagues cut up the terrain in different ways, but I like to say that the three central topics in philosophy are metaphysics, what there is, value theory, what there should be, and epistemology, what we know about it. So yeah, epistemology is the study of knowledge. I am historically in my training, like not really an epistemologist, like my primary area of interest, like in my dissertation years when I was here at Ohio State doing my graduate work, I'm a value theory guy for the most part, right? But I've always been interested in the philosophy of religion. And philosophy of religion is much more in the kind of metaphysics and epistemology space than it is in the value theory space. It is, it does value theory stuff too, but so these questions, especially about God, I was raised in a very intensive Christian environment. I still consider myself a Christian in a lot of ways, although not everybody would agree with me, depending on how you define these things. So I've always been interested in arguments for and against God's existence, and arguments about the soul and things of that nature. As I've been teaching for many years here at Ohio State, I've picked up a lot of interest in Asian philosophies, more recently in indigenous philosophies. And so I kind of take, if you ask me, what do I love about philosophy? It's more in the kind of comparative philosophy of religion space, right? Like how do we think critically about all of these really big questions about the deep nature of reality, and especially these questions that don't have straightforward answers, right? Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Right? Like one of my very favorite papers in philosophy is by Derek Parfit, and it's called "Why Anything, Why This?" And it's an attempt to discuss the question of why there's something rather than nothing, which he calls the most sublime of all philosophical questions, and I tend to agree with him. So those kinds of questions are the ones that I find personally the most compelling, the most interesting, and those kinds of questions do not lend themselves to direct observational analysis like we would do in the sciences, right? So I love science. I think science is wonderful. Any questions that we can answer through science, we should answer through science. When science gives us a clear conclusion, we need to listen to that clear conclusion. At the same time, sometimes people constrain their beliefs about the world, or they try to constrain their beliefs about the world or their speculations about the world only to the things that science can answer. And that is a mistake, because fundamentally there are these non-scientific questions. Why is there a universe at all? Why are there laws of physics that we can use to be able to study the world? And the philosophers of religion have been asking those questions forever, right? Like these are kind of theological questions, historically speaking, and that kind of philosophy emerges out of theology. So the kind of epistemology that I find the most interesting and compelling is that kind of philosophy, epistemology. That epistemology about these really big and difficult to answer questions, these like big cosmic kinds of questions, are the ones that I care about. And if you ask me, how do you answer those questions? I think looking at the history of the philosophy of religion is a good place to start. Because we've seen various arguments, these big philosophical arguments, like the cosmological argument, like, is it possible that there be an infinite chain of cause and effect, or does there have to be a first cause, right? Is it possible that everything is contingent, or does there have to be something that is necessary, right? Is there a kind of eternal regress of transcendency, or is there like a maximally transcendent thing, right? Like those kinds of questions are really fascinating, and again, not amenable to direct scientific analysis, right? You just have to do philosophy about them. So there's a bunch of arguments there, right? But all of us agree that those arguments aren't going to get you a singular, well fleshed out, compelling to all rational people conclusion, right? Those arguments are going to lead us kind of into a space of rational belief and rational disbelief, but kind of rational disagreement, right? This is why there's so much variation in people who think about these questions. Very serious-minded, very well-intentioned people come to very different conclusions. Why is that? Well, it's because of the nature of these questions, right? And how hard they are to answer. And so in addition to this kind of abstract argumentation that we see in the philosophy of religion, there's also this movement that's kind of most typified by Pascal, Blaise Pascal, and Pascal's Wager is this argument, right? That essentially, when the evidence is not entirely conclusive, you still have to live, and you have to live in a way that asks more practical questions. Well, what would it mean to live as though God existed versus living as though God didn't, right? Because even if I can't be certain one way or the other, I have to live somehow, right? To jump outside of Western philosophy, let's go hang out with some Asian philosophy for a minute. There's a very famous story in Buddhism about one of the Buddha's followers whose name was Malankapautra. And it's a very funny little story. Malankapautra comes to the Buddha and he says, I have all these questions like about the deep nature of reality. Is there a soul or is there not? Is there an afterlife or is there not? Is there karma or is there not? Does the universe have a beginning or is there not? Or is it both of the above or none of the above? And like, you're not answering my questions. And if you don't answer my questions, I'm going to go home. Right. And the Buddha just looks at him and says, did I ever tell you I was going to answer those questions? All I've told you is that I'm going to tell you the nature of suffering, the cause of suffering, and the solution to suffering, and the methods for doing that. That's all I'm here to tell you, right? So there's a parallel there, which is kind of like, yes, let's engage these serious abstract questions, and let's take them very seriously. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get a single satisfying answer that all rational people are going to agree about. And you're going to have to make practical decisions about how you live and how you cope with suffering and how you treat other beings, right? And so that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And so there needs to be these kind of what are sometimes called pragmatic arguments that kind of transition us from that abstract space into the more practical space. Pascal's Wager is one of them. I think, it's an early argument and there's lots of problems with it, the wager itself. But some later philosophers like William James in his book, The Will to Believe, does, I think, a better job than Pascal does. And then there's new philosophers like living, active philosophers like Lara Buchak, who are doing really nice work on faith. So actually, my favorite paper in philosophy right now is Lara Buchak's paper called Faith and Traditions, and it's a really fascinating. She has a really fascinating account about what faith is, because for her, a faith is a kind of a risky commitment. So it's a commitment that you have to a belief and the things that follow from that belief, like your actions and your communities and your projects and stuff like that. Even when the evidence wavers, even when the evidence is uncertain. And she talks about how this is a rational thing for us to do. And she does it really nicely using 3 example cases. Yes, religious faith, of course, that's kind of the paradigm example of faith. But also in the sciences, scientific paradigms are modeled in this kind of way. And she also talks about this in ethics. So in all 3 of those areas, religion and science and ethics, we have these views, and we have these views that are sometimes in tension with the evidence, or sometimes the evidence is unclear. And so how do we live in those circumstances? Well, one of the things that we do is we kind of find communities of belief, communities of practice, and we stay in them even when our evidence is fluctuating to some extent. Like this is happening right now. Mm-hmm. Sciences, right? Like as the evidence is breaking the paradigm of the last 100 years or so. Mm-hmm. And this is happening for lots of reasons, but not only because of UFOs, but also things in neuroscience, right? Like we thought that as we got to know more and more about the brain, we could figure out what consciousness is, and it turns out we didn't. And that's leading philosophers like David Chalmers to start thinking about what used to be very exotic views like panpsychism, the idea that everything might be conscious to some extent. And those views are starting to be taken seriously in philosophy and neuroscience, and right, like these weird things that happened in quantum mechanics. So like the old idea of a mechanistic, deterministic universe is dead. And what are we replacing that with? It's not clear, right? This very strange behavior of the universe, which does seem to somehow fluctuate based on us and our observations of the universe. And right, so there's this kind of materialistic, mechanistic, deterministic worldview that has been kind of in vogue for a while, and it's starting to erode, right? But it makes sense to stick with it for a while, right? Let's while we try to figure out what this might mean, we're going to continue operating within this paradigm, and Buchak's going to call that a kind of faith, and I think that's perfectly rational to do, right? But what happens is eventually, if as the evidence drifts away, many people will go through a crisis of faith and they will shift, right? And so in the sciences, this is a paradigm shift. In religions, this is a literal conversion experience from either one religion to another, or from non-religion to religion, or from religion to non-religion, or whatever it is that people go through, right? And you can see the same thing happen in ethics, because you might have grown up, like I did, with a certain set of political and social and ethical values. And then, many of those have changed over the years as I've encountered more people and learned more about the world, and realized that some of my older views might not have been sensitive enough to some of the things that are going on in the world. And so I went through value changes, right? So anyways, I would highly recommend for anybody who wants to think about epistemology and UFOs to go look at the kind of philosophical work that's been done on pragmatic arguments, on faith, and in particular, I would highly recommend the work of Lara Buchak. I do this in the video that I said I would recommend most these days, the one that I did on David Grush on my YouTube channel. The whole beginning of that is a kind of quick and dirty introduction to this kind of pragmatic epistemology and what that means for this moment. Because really, at the end of the day, if we ask about this moment, about UFOs and aliens and NHI and UAP and all that kind of stuff, right? Do we have the evidence that we need? No. But there's stuff we need to do, right? And to answer your question about the kind of mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive things. So it's a difficult thing to explain verbally. I would want to use like slides or something. But essentially what you try to do is kind of map out what's called logical space. Like what are all the options? And the way you try to do that is by coming up with what are called these mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive dichotomies. The easiest way to do that is to just get these pairs of concepts where one is defined as the negation of the other. I actually just started working on a flowchart of kind of concepts in the UAP space. Maybe I don't know, this isn't public anywhere yet, but it will be one of these days. But I can't show it to you easily right now. But like, okay, so there's these things that I like to call 6 OCs, 6 observable craft, because I hate using the term UFO because U means unidentified, and you don't want to define a concept with the idea unidentified, right?
That's a good point.
That's ridiculous. So we need a concept like, if I'm talking, casually, I'll say something like flying saucer, right? Like people kind of know what those are. Well, a flying saucer isn't unidentified, right? Like if you saw a flying saucer, as many people have, or at least many people claim to have, many people have had the experience of seeing a flying saucer, right? Whether there are flying saucers is still in dispute, I suppose. But right, it's not unidentified. It was about this big. It was this shape. It had those lights. It did these, right? And so there are these 6 observables that are described in a number of places, but in particular, I would encourage everybody who's not paying attention to go look at the UAP Disclosure Act that's been proposed now twice by the Senate. It passed the first time and got shut down in the House, and it's in process right now. But the 6 observables are defined in there, and I'm probably not going to be able to spew them off the top of my head, but basically, acceleration and
no emissions, maybe
transmedium. Anyways, so there are these like certain qualities that correlate with these experiences that people are having, right? So, okay, what are those things, right? And so, like, okay, well, they might be purely subjective. That is, it's just an experience of ours, like a hallucination or a projection of some kind, or it might be objective. It might actually be something out in the world, right? What kind of thing might it be? Well, it might be an ordinary material object, right? Made up of protons, neutrons, electrons, dark matter, whatever else stuff there is. Or it might be an immaterial object of some kind, right? Like it might be a spiritual object, a consciousness object, like who knows, right? But let's stick with material objects, right? Okay, well, it might be either a naturally occurring object or an artificially constructed object. That is, one that just came about through the normal processes of nature, whatever those are. Or somebody might have designed and built such a thing, right?
That was a series of mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive dichotomies that you just took us through. Hallucination versus objective, then if it's objective, ordinary versus immaterial, then if it's ordinary, then natural versus constructed, for example.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
Right. So we could keep going. Right. So like if it's artificially constructed, it was either constructed by biological beings or by non-biological beings. So you can see for each of those, I'm just defining each concept as the negation of the other. So right, objective just means not entirely subjective. Immaterial means not entirely material. Artificial means not entirely natural, right? And so you can kind of use these to map out all of the options. And, I've attempted to do this, and I don't know, somewhere this will be made available at some point, but it's not public at the moment, right? But that's the kind of thing that I find incredibly helpful, because there's a number of taxonomies that people have proposed about like what 6OCs, flying saucers might be. And they tend to be these like 5 or 6 categories and then a bunch of lists underneath them. And that always makes me itchy because I'm like, why are those the 5 or 6 things you put on the list, right? Whereas if you kind of do this MECE thing, right, then you kind of somewhat have a tool to explore what all the options are, right? Mm-hmm. And I at least find that tremendously helpful. And then to get back to the question about like practicality and pragmatics, you can start asking, okay, well, what does all of this mean? I'm inclined to think that no matter what it means, even if you go all the way up to the very top, like whether it's objective or subjective, in this moment, there is a thing, a decision that is being made by certain parties, specifically in the United States government, where they do have information. They definitely have information, more information than they're sharing with the public. Even if it's all subjective, even if this is all some kind of a like psyop that the CIA is doing because they're trying to cover up some top secret research program that's been going on at Lockheed Martin since the 1940s, right? Well, I guess Lockheed didn't exist in the 1940s, but right, like
just Martin.
Yeah, that's right. So right, like if that's all it is, we should still get disclosure. Like we should still, the United States government is causing serious harms to all of humanity by keeping whatever secrets they're keeping for as long as they have. And that is bad, right? So like that's the kind of thing I like to do, right? To be like, all right, what are all the options? And then are there things that we can do now that cover as many of the bases as possible or all of the bases as possible, right? And that's what I'm trying to do because we definitely don't have enough information. We, the public, do not have enough information to answer the question, what are flying saucers? What are 6OCs? What are UFOs, right? We can't answer those questions. We don't have enough information. And so one of the things we tend to do is go, well, I guess we just ignore it. Right? Mm-hmm. And what I want to say, and what I am saying as loudly as I can in as many venues as I can is, no, we must not ignore it. Minimally, we must be aware of the history of this topic. We must see that high-level individuals in the government of the United States, like President Barack Obama, President Donald J. Trump, the head of the various intelligence communities, right? The head of the Inspector General of the intelligence community, the current one and the previous one, right? Like these really high-level people who are at Gang of 8 in Congress, the people who have the highest level security briefings, right? Like a lot of really highly placed, really highly cleared people are saying, Barack Obama said, there are objects in the sky. They do things that we do not know how to explain. Okay, then we need to take that seriously. We need to think about what those might be and what it might mean if they are real. When David Grush sits in front of the House Oversight Committee and under oath says the United States government has been running since at least the 1940s a top secret and potentially illegal UFO recovery program in which we have now at least, he says, like 2 digits worth of recovered craft and recovered biologics, bodies, perhaps one's living, perhaps not. Perhaps one's living under our custody and perhaps not. And the Inspector General of the intelligence community says those claims are credible and urgent. David Grush's lawyer is the previous Inspector General of the intelligence.
I believe the first Inspector General.
Yeah, and then the people go into these SCIFs, these secure compartmentalized whatever
facilities maybe.
Yeah, where you can give these classified briefings. Like we've seen people from House Oversight go into those meetings. We have video of them walking out of those meetings and talking to journalists, and they are shaken, right? They are shaken by what they are hearing behind those closed doors. And to say at this point, it's all just nonsensical, fringe, paranormal stuff, pseudoscientific stuff. Let's all just ignore it. Is insane. That's crazy. The presidents, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, they both said there are these things in the sky, right? Trump said it, of course, in a very Trumpy way, right? He's like, yeah, the Air Force guys, they briefed me and they believe the things are real, but some people think they're not real, but I hate China.
They might have been crying. They were big guys, but they're crying.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he said it, right? Like he got a briefing from people in the Air Force who said they believe that things are real. He said that on a podcast. If you care about this, go look at the video I did, or I kind of give a couple of these clips and we talk about these things, right? Okay, so no, it's crazy to ignore this topic, right? Like let's say it's all delusion. Then it's a delusion that the president and the highest cleared members of Congress and the highest cleared members of our intelligence community are taking seriously. Okay, well, even if they're all wrong, we need to get some information. Whatever information they have, some of it needs to be made public. It needs to be made public in a responsible and careful way, but it needs to be made public. A secret this old, a secret that goes back to the 40s at least, is toxic. It erodes the trust in government, and trust in government matters, right? Because if we don't trust our government, if we can't trust our government, if we can't trust our authority figures, then societies collapse, right? This is, one of the reasons why we should all be very concerned about these claims going around about all this election denialism and like that's a terrible thing to do. That is how governments collapse, right? Like when people start undermining confidence in the electoral system, that's when you lose electoral systems. That's when you get authoritative leaders, or not authoritative, authoritarian leaders, right? Mm-hmm. And so, man, if there is a secret, it is old. It goes back to at least the 1940s. We know that this is true. We know that there are things that the U.S. government learned in the 1940s that it has been keeping secret ever since. It is not disputed. Go look at what the public faces of the Air Force said in public interviews. This is not hard to do, right? They just say things like, well, most of these things we can explain, but some of them we cannot. And those ones we don't think are threats, so we're not going to pay attention to them anymore as the Air Force. And then below the surface, they run programs from then until now where they do pay attention to them. So they do have information. They definitely have information. And they've been hiding it since the 1940s. And that is bad news. We need to get some of it out. And that has to happen now. And it doesn't matter what you believe about what's going on. Cover all the bases. There is a secret. It is toxic. And it needs to come out.
That was amazing. I just wanted to ping one more tool that you kind of mentioned there gently, which is this Pascal's Wager idea, that the way you explain it in your YouTube video is you kind of create a grid between with 4 quadrants, and you put believe, don't believe, it's true, and it's not true. And that from that, you can make an argument about how you should behave, whether or not it's true, basically. So Pascal's version is like, you can believe or not that there is a God, and God can exist or not. But you could apply this to David Grush saying things, and you could believe that he's saying the truth, and then you could believe that it is in fact true or it isn't, and you could apply it to Obama and Trump saying these things. So that's just like a nifty framework for getting to how you should behave, even if you're not sure that something is true or real. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And right, there's an internal dispute in philosophy, like, because we like all these internal disputes about like esoteric things, whether Pascal's wager is properly about beliefs or not. Like, should we form our beliefs based on these pragmatic things is a big debate in philosophy. We don't need to settle that debate because I'm not talking about beliefs. I'm not telling you what to believe. I am telling you what to do. What to do. What should we do? We should put pressure on the U.S. government and any other governments that have information to responsibly release the big secret, the big insight, whatever that is, soon, right? Mm-hmm. All of us need to do that, regardless of what we think the question is. That's right. So yeah, the punchline of that is you should all be taking David Grush seriously, or at least acting like you do. Act like you take David Grush seriously. Act like you think this might be an option, right? Because if it is an option, it is the biggest thing that has ever happened, right? And like people sometimes ask these questions, right? Like, if a secret this, how could you keep a secret as this since the 1940s? I will tell you how you keep a secret this big since the 1940s. First of all, the secret has not been kept. It has been leaking consistently since the 1940s. Mm-hmm. The Philip Corsos and the various other parties, all the way back to the 40s, who have been saying, hey guys, no, really, there's something here. Hey guys, no, really, we recovered something, right? Like Marcel, Major Marcel, who was at the Roswell thing, right? At first, like, he goes along with the general and he says, oh no, it was a weather balloon. And then he poses with that picture of like Mylar or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But and as he gets older and retires, and like, he's like, no, that was all a lie. Like, here's what actually happened, right? Like, okay, so you believe him or not, but the idea that it hasn't been leaking is crazy. It's been leaking since the very beginning. Why hasn't it leaked more than that? Well, here's why it hasn't leaked more than that. Go pick up Richard Dolan's book, UFOs in the National Security State, and read just the introduction, right? And in the introduction, he talks about this fact. When you sign these like national security oaths, you literally sign away parts of your constitutional rights to ordinary due process. If you violate one of your intelligence oaths, they can lock you up for like 20 years with no public trial.
That's critical because you might not get to have your day in court. You would just disappear.
So how do you keep this a secret? Like that. Can you keep secrets like this? Yes, we did. The Manhattan Project was kept that way. Right in the 40s, the U.S. government, like little pockets to the side of the U.S. government, spent like $2 billion in building the bomb and recruiting these high-level scientists and getting all this uranium and like, all that stuff was done in secret. So secret that, again, members of Congress didn't know it was happening. Like, we have done this before. We've done it before. We have mechanisms for doing it. And in fact, David Grush just says this. The exact same mechanisms that kept the Manhattan Project secret are the same mechanisms that have been used to keep the UFO recovery program secret.
Yes, literal rules about nuclear energy have been applied for the secrecy here.
That's exactly right. And probably the same literal people and the same literal administrative structures that were set up are involved, right? Right. Well, once you start digging into this, right, especially like historically, like the back in the 40s kind of stuff. Again, Richard Dolan's book, UFOs in the National Security State, is probably the best one to get.
Totally agree. Both volumes, excellent work. The closest thing we have to a history book about this.
Yeah. And right, like, no, like they, if you go look at this, like these incidents, these UFO incidents started happening at scale at the same time, right? And I mean, there's various stories around, right? Like Jacques Vallée has this book on the Trinity incident, which seems to indicate that there might have been a pretty substantial UFO recovery that happened before Roswell at the Trinity site because they're paying attention to and doing something with our nuclear program, right? Mm-hmm. Another point that Dolan makes, which I think is really brilliant, is, like you might think, well, gosh, why the 40s? Like, why did people not see these things before that? And the answer again is they did. What are you talking about? History is full of people seeing weird things in the sky. right? They're mostly in the religious literature. So go take the religious literature seriously, right? Like stop infantilizing all of our ancient people and saying, well, they must have all just been superstitious morons. No, maybe they saw stuff and they were communicating it as they were intending to do. And maybe they were saying what they meant, right? And anyways, right? But like, okay, but why this wave that happens in the 40s? Because in the 40s, or, you know, the 30s and 40s, but the 40s in particular, is the first time where we start having substantial numbers of aircraft in the air on a regular basis, including radar. It's the first time we could see them and pick them up on the radar, right? This is sort of like when we start asking about exoplanets, right? And, you know, when did we find exoplanets?
Yes, like 20 years ago.
Developed the tools to look for them, right? Like as soon as we figured out how to do that trick where you watch the star and watch its brightness dim as something goes in front of it, the second we figured that out, we started finding exoplanets everywhere, right? The second we started being able to really do that at a fine-grained level and pay attention to the atmospheric composition, we started seeing, oh, some of these planets have atmospheric compositions that might indicate the presence of life. So like this is happening over and over again, right? Where it's like, when we develop the capacity to measure it, we find it. Why didn't we find it before that? Because we weren't looking, because we couldn't look, right?
Yeah. And I looked those numbers up about airplanes just because I was curious. And it's like a few hundred aircraft in the Air Force in like the late 30s. And then it's thousands after World War II, of course. And Ryan Graves has said something similar about the past 20 years, that they turned on a new radar system and bam, they started seeing these things that they couldn't see before. So
that's right.
That is, I think, another argument that we're going to get more information about this inevitably because our technology is improving so rapidly.
Yes. Argument that the government has more information than we do, right? Like,
yeah, almost certainly, because their centers are ahead. Yeah, way more. And satellite data and stuff like that. What you've talked about in other places. I've got so many epistemology questions that now seem silly, but I did want to ping Occam's razor because I feel like people use this from all the directions in the UFO world. I was wondering if you had a take on it.
Oh, yeah.
One sort of primer is that from the point of view of an average person, widespread confusion about this situation is like the Occam's razor explanation. Everybody's just confused about what they saw, about what they experienced. That's the simplest explanation. But once you start digging into it, the intuition that I've been having is that the simplest solution is some form of extraterrestrial visitation. Like it's quite intuitive if you just like assume that we'll get much better at traveling places. And 100 years ago, Lord Kelvin thought that we'd never achieve flight without balloons or something like that. You know, like we'll probably do better than we currently can do. So Occam's razor to me seems like ET is the natural explanation, and that it's actually more complicated to imagine, as you've pointed out, some like very elaborate conspiracy to keep anti-gravity secret for 80 years. But I want to throw that open to you. Do you have a take on Occam's razor and UFOs?
Yeah, great. Absolutely. So Occam's razor is not believe the simplest explanation. You know what the simplest explanation is? The simplest explanation is literally the null hypothesis. Nothing exists. There you go. That is the simplest possible hypothesis.
What we think, therefore we must be.
Yeah, okay, so there you go. We've got to reject the null hypothesis, right? So it's not believe the simplest view. It is believe the simplest view that is compatible explanatorily with all of the data, right? Mm-hmm. You know what's simpler than heliocentrism? Geocentrism. Like it's so much simpler to say that when I look up in the sky and I see the sun moving, that's because the sun is moving, right? At least initially it seems that way. Mm-hmm. And then why did we change our minds? Because as we observed more and more, we started seeing these things that were called epicycles, right? In astrology, it's called retrograde motion. Mercury is retrograde. That's why you're having a bad day. In astronomy, it's called apparent retrograde motion, right? The path of the planets through the stars does these weird loops. And so we started going like, well, that's weird. I wonder how we explain that. And the answer was, well, I guess we need to move the Earth out of the middle of the model. I guess we need to put the Earth going around the sun. So what's the simplest way to do that? Circular orbits. And the circular orbits model was the first thing we tried as heliocentrists, and it didn't work, right? We couldn't predict the position of the planets. And so it had to get more complicated. We had to switch to elliptical motion, right? That's what Kepler was doing, right? So like, okay, once we use ellipses, now it's starting to work, right?
Reminding me of that Einstein quote, as simple as possible, but no simpler.
That is exactly right? So our good friend Al, saving us again, that is Occam's razor. As simple as possible, but no simpler. And at this point, right? Once you start reading UFOs in the national security state, once you start looking at the UAP Disclosure Act in Congress, once you start watching the testimony of David Grush, watching the faces of the people walking out of the classified briefings, you now have data that is not accountable for under the it's all just delusion explanation. It's not all just delusion. Something is going on. And that okay, so there's a difference between being a skeptic and being incredulous, right? Incredulous is just not having a belief, right? Like, I'm just not going to believe stuff. That's not what skepticism is. Skepticism is this kind of stuff we were talking about earlier, right? The mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, like mapping out logical space. What are all the possibilities? Skepticism is keeping as many possibilities open as possible, not pushing to the like most reductive thing. That's not skepticism. That's just materialism, right? That's just reductivism, right? And like, no, that's not the philosophical virtue. Skepticism is the philosophical virtue. Get skeptical about your alleged skepticism. Why are you so confident that there are no aliens? But after all, as soon as we started looking for them, we started finding these things. As soon as we started looking in the sky, we started picking up on radar and visually these weird objects. As soon as we started looking around other stars, we found planets. As soon as we started looking at their atmospheres, they had complex compositions. Like, come on. Like, no, it's just not the simplest view anymore to just assume that we're the only beings in the universe. And once you go through the paradigm shift, it's insane to think that we're the only beings in the universe who are conscious and aware and technological, right? Mm-hmm. Go back to your Fermi's paradox stuff. Our beloved sun is a main sequence star at a certain point in its history. And like, we kind of know how these main sequence stars evolve and what their planetary systems look like, et cetera, et cetera. And we know for a fact that there are main sequence stars just like ours who have gone all the way through their life cycles millions of years ago. So there could have been civilizations exactly like ours millions of years ago. Like, we know that for a fact. There's no way that possibility can be ignored. We know how the stars evolve. We know how the planets develop. We know, to some extent, how life develops. We know how evolution happens. We know how societies develop. We know how technologies develop. Right now, we really only have the sample size of one. But it's insane to think that the default view should be, we're probably the only ones out there. What, are you crazy? Like, why would you think that? There are just literally billions and trillions of galaxies with billions and trillions of stars and billions and trillions of planets and billions and trillions of them in the right zones. And come on, of course we're not the only ones out there. And then we're just like, well, why don't we see them? We have seen them. We've seen them since the beginning. But how could the government keep the secret? They haven't. And they've been trying really hard. And like, actually, at the end of the day, the simplest hypothesis is that David Grush is telling the truth.
I want to hop in here just to address this idea that there almost certainly are things out there, because I think you're right that it's crazy not to think that. And I also think that's a majority opinion. And something I hear a lot when I'm talking to friends about this is, well, I definitely think there's somebody somewhere. I just don't think they're here. Yeah. And so what I've thought about a lot is like, what are the assumptions that people are making that are preventing them from getting from, oh, there's almost certainly someone, to there's somebody here. And I what I would love to see us do is evolve collectively toward a position of, oh yeah, it's very likely that they're out there and they're here and that they're technologically superior to us because they've been around for millions of years. And the two that I can think of are that people are assuming that faster than light travel is almost certainly impossible. And or maybe they're assuming that very long haul travel would be prohibitively difficult if faster than light travel isn't possible. And then they're assuming that visitors would be public. And I think that second one is easily dispensed with by thinking about how we interact with non-contacted peoples on Earth. We mostly leave them alone. And if you just imagine us going to like Pandora or whatever and visiting another civilized planet, you can expect that we wouldn't land in a populated area and go, here we are, here are our light drives or whatever. We would like scope them out for like maybe even hundreds of years, and we'd try to fit in and be crafty. So then that only leaves this question of like, will we get better at moving very fast? And as you've pointed out, and there's some really pretty good papers about this, the 6OC observables suggest that faster than light travel might be achievable. Like what we're seeing and measuring right now imply that, as you've described, these things could be starships. Many of them could be starships if the accelerations that we're witnessing in the atmosphere hold up out of the atmosphere. Yeah, just wanted to bounce that off here because that's kind of state of my thinking.
So there's like three things in there, right? Like you couldn't do with faster than light. Sorry, faster than light travel is not possible. Slower than light travel is not fast enough. And if they were here, we would see them. So all three of those are wrong. Like we know that all three. Like it's not even controversial. They're all wrong. They are all wrong. So why is the first one wrong? We have solutions to the general relativity equation for warp drives. Like, can we build them? No. The current solutions that we have imply energy needs that are way beyond what we could do. Mm-hmm. But like in the short period of time that physicists have been working with our current physics, which is known to be broken and incomplete,
mm-hmm.
right? Like we know for a fact that modern physics is not the correct physics that governs the universe because there's this contradiction between relativity and quantum mechanics. We know we don't have the right physics. Even using our current limited, incomplete physics, there are solutions to the general relativity equations which allow for warp drives that like we're solving and we're getting better at solving and we're looking at implications of them. There was just a paper that came out a little while ago that looks about what would happen if you turned a warp drive off, right? Well, it would create these gravity waves that we might be able to detect. Okay, like
cool.
Well, maybe this is going to be like that thing with the stars, where once we can start looking for exoplanets, we'll find them. Mm-hmm. Maybe the second we go looking for collapsing warp bubbles, it's just going to be like, oh God, they're collapsing all over the place.
Yeah.
Right? Like, now that hasn't happened. It really hasn't happened. But like, that's because we haven't looked yet, right? Or for all we know, it's because we haven't looked yet, right? Okay, mm-hmm. So is it possible to travel faster than light? Yes. Through ordinary space-time? No. By creating space-time bubbles? Yes. How fast can space-time bubbles move? Arbitrarily fast. How about wormholes? Yeah, we know in principle you can solve the general relativity equations to create wormholes, to pinch together these 2 points in time space that you can move directly through without traveling through the intervening space. Okay. So faster than light travel is possible. Is it tractable? I don't know. I don't know. But again, like you said, there's evidence that maybe it is because when we look into the sky, they're acting like they have warp drives. Mm-hmm. They're acting like they have some kind of weird space-time manipulation drives, right? Okay, so fine. Set that aside. Ignore all of it. Ignore all of the really smart, really highly qualified, professional visual observers like David Fravor. And just ignore all of them for the time being. Okay, so slower than light travel only. That's what Fermi's paradox is about, right? So right, like if we have the stars and the planets and the evolutionary time for millions of years ago, for there to be technological societies like ours, then with a slower than light drive, you could get across the galaxy in 1 million years, and there has been 1 million years. So no, and that's just to ignore actual special relativity and time dilation. Like, yeah, it takes 50 years to travel 50 light years for the people sitting at the destinations, but not for the people on the ships. If you go fast enough, then the subjective experience of the people on the ships can be reduced arbitrarily small. It could be an hour, depending on how fast you accelerate, right? Kevin Knuth's video on the Soul Foundation YouTube channel is a really lovely introduction to this. Go check it out if you want to get into the physics. No, slower than light drives are fine. We don't need faster than light drives to explain contact. Right, so the first thing is false. It's faster than light travel is possible. We know it's possible. Slower than light travel isn't fast enough. Yes, it is. Relativity, and there's been plenty of time. If they were here, we would see them. And exactly as you point out, no, we wouldn't. Why would they do that? Haven't you ever watched Star Trek? The prime frickin' directive. It's the prime directive. The first directive. Don't mess with a pre-warp society. You will screw it up. And we don't even have to go as exotic as when we discover a remote village in the jungles of somewhere and we don't want to mess with them. We don't even have to go that exotic. Although we can. Let's go there for a second, right? What are they doing? They're seeing airplanes go over them and they make mythologies about them because they don't know what they are, right? Okay, so maybe that's what's been going on. But let's look at something else. Let's look at U.S. foreign policy, right? So here's what happened in U.S. foreign policy. In World War II, we had this, I'm sure you've heard of it, right? There's a very large war. And it happened essentially on these two fronts, like the Pacific front, primarily with Japan, and on the European front, primarily with Germany, right? And after the war, there was this really massive reconstruction effort to kind of, get the U.S. government really involved in how these two countries reconstructed themselves. And for a whole variety of really complicated reasons that I do not pretend to have any real insight into, they were wildly successful. Japan and Germany both emerged as these global powers with their own cultural heritage preserved, and they like shot into the forefront of technology and culture, and right, wow, we did a great job with cultural reconstruction after World War II. And then Korea happened, and Vietnam happened, and the Iraq wars happened, and Afghanistan happened. And what did we learn from those? Oh, actually, reconstruction usually doesn't work. Outside interference usually doesn't work, right? What did we learn? What should we have learned, for God's sake, in Iraq, right? Well, gosh, was Saddam Hussein a good guy? No. Saddam Hussein was a monster. He just murdered people, and he had a corrupt government, and he had no legitimacy to his rule. But when we killed him and took him out, the whole place went fundamentally unstable. And out of this rises the Islamic State, right? So, like, what are we trying to learn how to do now? Be more hands-off with these other cultures, these other societies, even if they're doing bad things, right? We tried to fix Afghanistan with the bad things that the Taliban were doing. By the way, who created the Taliban? We did. We armed the Taliban against the Soviets because we wanted them to stand up against them. The United States created the Taliban and then got upset about how they ran the country. And so we got in there and we tried to mess with it, and it was a disaster. And our extraction was a disaster. So what might we learn from just the U.S. foreign policy of the last 50 years? What could we learn? The prime directive. Don't mess with the development of other cultures unless you are really, really careful about it. And so if we're thinking that we're dealing with societies that have had 1 million years more time, already made contact with other societies. They've already been through this more than once. There are probably protocols in place. There are probably rules in place. There's probably a complicated society with different rules. They probably don't agree with each other. That's probably why we are looking at what they're doing, and it's just so maddening to try to figure out what's going on. I try to imagine figuring out U.S. foreign policy from the outside on the ground if you had no access to the media in the United States. Imagine trying to understand U.S. foreign policy just by watching the planes fly overhead. You don't know about the Electoral College. You don't know about the two-party system. You don't know about how campaign finance works. You don't know about dark money. You don't know about the ways that rich people can influence. Like, essentially, there's two elections. There's the one where the rich people decide who runs, and then there's the one where the rest of us decide which of those rich people's favorites we want to pick, right? If you don't understand that, then you will never be able to understand why the planes fly over one day and then they don't fly over the next. Why the planes are dropping bombs one day and dropping food the next. And that's probably the situation that we're in. We're dealing with societies. How complex are they? They've got to be at least as complex as our societies, right? How many of them are there? There's no way there's one of them. There's a bunch of them. There's almost certainly some kind of complicated interstellar political situation. And we are on the fringe of it. And we are in a fishbowl. And they are watching us. And they might have been involved in various ways. They might have crashed some things by accident. They might have gifted some things on purpose. They might be trying to give us some hints. They might be keeping an eye on our nukes. There's lots of evidence that they're keeping an eye on our nukes. They might be getting real loud right now because we're about to create an artificial God. Small g God, not big G God. I believe in big G God. Small g God. We're about to create an artificial mind more intelligent than we are. And that's dangerous. Go read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence book. And they're watching. They're watching that. They're watching the nukes. They're watching us fry the environment and not give a shit so that the rich people and the oil companies can stay rich, because that's the only reason that we're doing it. The oil companies have known since like the 50s that dumping all of this CO2 into the atmosphere is causing problems, and they've paid for people to ignore it so that they can stay rich. It is that dumb. And like, look, there are 3 existential threats on the table: nuclear war, AI, and environmental degradation. And you know when you might violate the Prime Directive? You know when Jean-Luc Picard and William Riker start having little conscience problems when they're trying to figure out whether they're going to let these people fry, when it gets to the level of an existential threat. Go watch Star Trek. Like, come on, it's homework now. Like, why aren't they more obvious? Because they're following the Prime Directive.
This is kind of a side note, but you mentioned in other places that if this technology is being worked on, if we are working on this technology somewhere and we know about it, then it is a climate scandal of an enormous magnitude that we are not sharing this information with people who could research it more and deliver us, free energy, or at least much better energy. We're into sort of some of the fun stuff here, I think. So I wanted to ask you a fun tickler that I've enjoyed thinking about, which is, why are they kind of careful? Why do we not see them landing in Times Square, but we do sometimes see them talking to kids in Zimbabwe? Like, what accounts for that sort of mixed behavior?
So I think the mixed behavior is explained personally, and again, like, now we're speculating, right? Like, sure. I like to call the moment when we pivot to speculation, because everything I've said before now is not speculation, right? It's just observation of the astrophysics and the political history of our own country. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just an observations about things that we have already learned from history, and then a little bit of speculation about how that might imply, or how that might apply to these other beings if they exist, right? Like, there's a tiny bit of speculation in there. Mm-hmm. But now you're asking me to speculate a little bit more. Okay, so
I skipped a bunch of epistemology questions because I feel like we ate enough of our vegetables.
Okay, sorry. So ask me your question again, just so I can make sure that I address it more and it's hard.
Why kind of careful? Why would we sometimes see them? We know thousands of people have had direct encounters. We know millions of people have seen these UFOs, but we also know they have not landed on the White House lawn. There's been no formal public introduction. So they're clearly avoiding that in some way, but they're not completely avoiding us. Yeah. What are some ideas that emerge for you about possibilities that could explain that?
So let's play with 2, right? And again, we'll pick foreign policy, right? So maybe we decide that we're not going to get on the ground. We're not going to put troops on the ground. We're not going to shoot people down, but we're going to do this kind of like trying to win hearts and minds thing, right? Like, we're going to do these kind of information, what are called psyops, right? These psychological operations where we're trying to like dropping pamphlets and things like that. Like, we do stuff like that. It might just be that like this might literally be the pamphlet dropping stage. Like, hey guys, you're not alone. Hey guys, you're not alone. Hey guys, you're not alone. And like, we're not landing. You don't need to worry, right? We're not invading, but we're here, right?
Like a soft launch idea.
Yeah, that's right. There's the really wonderful novel by Arthur C. Clarke called Childhood's End. In Childhood's End, there are extraterrestrials that come, and the kind of standard scenario happens where ships show up over every major city. But the kind of I'm going to spoil this, by the way, and it's a really wonderful story. There's also I think a short series that I've not seen about it. I've only read the novel. So spoilers for Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, which is a good book to read. Okay, so the standard thing happens: big ships hover over every major city, but then they do nothing. They literally sit stationary for years until everybody gets used to them, because then they're like, oh, I guess they're not threats, because they got here and then they just sat there. So everybody freaked out. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? And then they did nothing. And then one day they opened the doors and they came out and they look like demons. They look physically like our image of demons, right?
Okay.
And they were like, look, we knew that your theology of demons was going to freak you out. So we waited for a nice long time so that you could understand that we weren't a threat. And now that you've seen us, please don't judge us by our appearance, right? Yeah, some of your ancestors saw us and they freaked out and then they build these stories about us and they weren't true, right? They misunderstood what we were doing and then they, right? So I don't know, like there's a claim. Why are they doing this? Because they're waiting. They're waiting to let us know, yes, they're here, and yes, they're not a threat, right? This threat narrative, which is unfortunately part of how the disclosure movement in DC is getting pushed, right? Like even like Americans for Safe Aerospace. This is an aerospace threat. We might crash into them. We're not going to crash into them. We've never crashed into one of them, right? They're so fast and maneuverable, and they know where we are. We're like big lumbering elephants compared to them.
That's true. Although they've described like 11 close calls or something like that. They didn't say anybody's died.
Really close calls, like 50 feet away, professional pilots fly by a thing, and then people are like, it's probably a balloon. Come on. These are professional military pilots. They know what balloons look like. Okay. Anyways. Right. So there's that kind of stuff. And there's also this threat narrative, like, could we defend ourselves against them? And the answer is no, of course we couldn't defend ourselves against them. If they fly into Maelstrom Air Force Base and turn off all the nukes and then turn them all back on again and fly away, like, no, there's nothing we could do to stop them. So if you speculate about why disclosure hasn't happened, this is actually my favorite explanation. It's from my colleague here at Ohio State, Alexander Wendt, wrote this paper on sovereignty, political sovereignty, and UFOs, because sovereignty is just, the control that a nation has over its own land, right? And if you don't have sovereignty, you don't have a nation. And if UFOs exist, then we don't have sovereignty. They can fly in and out of our airspace, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, they can literally visit people in their houses, maybe. So
that's exactly right. Okay. So why pseudo hidden? One possible reason is that they're letting them. This is the pamphlet dropping stage, right? They're trying to not appear to be a threat. They're trying to let us know they're not a threat, but they're also letting us know that they're here. That's hypothesis one. Here's another hypothesis. They don't agree with each other. It's the political variation argument, right? Some of them want to land and eat our cows. Some of them want to land and draw weird things in the crops. Some of them want to take some of our humans up into their spaceships and do hybridization experiments or something, right? And others of them say, you can't do that. The Prime Directive. Don't you remember what happened on blah, blah, blah Prime? And like, stop doing that, right? And then, the kid that came down in his ship and ate the cow has to go to court. It's like a misdemeanor offense to eat a cow. But that rich kid was like, high on pangalactic gargle blasters and decided that would have been a fun thing to do that day. Like, it could be that mundane, right? That there are rules and some people are breaking the rules. Or it could be that the rules are such that this is the kind of contact that makes for good preliminary contact, because, for instance, it might spark the birth of science fiction, which might allow us to go through this speculative phase where we do things like create Star Trek and think about warp drives and think about the Prime Directive and think about kinds of things that might go well and the things that might go wrong. And all of science fiction might be a kind of preparatory phase for what's about to happen next.
That's a fascinating idea. It made me want to ask what you thought about this evolving form factor concept that, like, in the late 1800s, you have that weird series of airship sightings. And maybe going farther back, people describe like he was flying on a shield or like a chariot or something. Do you think there's something to this idea that they might be kind of introducing the tech they think we can grok and gradually increasing that? Or do you think it's more like people are describing what they're seeing using the paradigms of the time?
I have no eye. Right?
Like, total speculation.
No. Like it's so after you read UFOs in the National Security State, or you can read Leslie Kean's book, which is a nice shorter book, or you could go watch The Phenomenon, which is a nice documentary, right? Like there's a couple of paths in, but like if you want to meet anything, Dolan's national security state book is like the first real meaty thing you want to get into if you want to go at the kind of the government secrecy angle. But there's another angle, which is this angle. And then you need to read Jacques Vallée, right? Mm. Then you need to go read Passport to Magonia and The Invisible College and books like that, where he starts pointing out, hey, something like this has been going on forever. And it's really, really weird. Like, it's tied in with our fairy lore and the stuff about satyrs and, right, like these incidents that happened in Japan where there's like a floating ship that's kind of like it's made of pottery, and there's these apparent airships that look like blimps or something. And when they meet people, which they did, right, like they had encounters with occupants in the United States, and they said they were from Venus and Mars or whatever, right? Like, okay, are they from Venus or Mars? Or is that like phase one, right? Where they're like, all right, well, we can't bring in the motherships because they'll freak out. So what if we like put together an airship that would be like a little bit ahead of where they are? And then what if when they encounter us, we don't tell them we're from Alpha Centauri or we're from Zeta Reticuli, right? We tell them we're from Venus, right? Because like that's going to be enough for them because they don't even know that there is a planet around Zeta Reticuli yet because they haven't figured out how to do exoplanet measurements yet, right? So maybe there's this kind of introductory curriculum, right? Where it's been like, actually, as far back all of human history, every human society has said that they've encountered weird objects in the sky and weird people from the sky. That's universal. Go look at the history of the worldviews of all ancient and indigenous traditions. All of them say that there are beings coming from the sky. Is this a secret? How has this been kept a secret? What do you mean a secret? It's never been a secret. Go read all of the ancient texts. All of them have said that we've never been alone. We've never been alone. But yeah, there does seem to be this difference in presentation. That might be that they're actually building airships, right? Like there's like a, I don't know, there's like a base on the other side of the moon or on the bottom of the ocean where the like prime directive warm-up society is doing their job. And they're like, all right, now's about the time to crank out an airship, kids. They make an airship and then let's fly it over the United States, right? Like, let's go crash something at Roswell because that's right next to their nukes and that'll freak them out, right? Like maybe there's an intentional plan and they're actually doing that like that. Or like Jacques Vallée at least considers, it might be really weirder than that, right? It might be that our perceptions of them are not really objective, right? That we're like engaging with something stranger than that, like something, people like to use this term higher dimensional, right? Or spiritual or consciousness or whatever. Like it might be weirder than that. After all, the phenomenon are really weird. We have situations, Jacques Vallée talked about this in The Invisible College, where there are objects that show up in the sky, and they are seen by dozens or hundreds of thousands of simultaneous people. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who can't see them.
That is super weird.
Go listen to like Gary Nolan and the Soul Foundation people talk about this. There seems to be some kind of trend that there are actually brain structures and maybe even genetic markers for people who can see them. And then if people don't have them, they can't see them. Well, that means something else, right? That's weirder and much harder to understand, right? And this is people start falling into what's called the woo, right? Yeah. Which is like, oh God, maybe they're not just ships. Now that there do seem to be ships, right? David Grush seems to be giving us plenty of evidence that there are metal discs.
And there are nuts and bolts,
right? There are nuts and bolts, right? But there are these other weird things, the Jacques Vallée type things, which don't seem to be nuts and boltsy, right? Mm-hmm. And who knows how those things relate to each other. There's this other assumption that people have, which is not a viable assumption, that all UAP, all of these unidentified anomalous phenomena are the same phenomena, the same reality. Mm-hmm. No reason to think that. Maybe there are metal ships. Maybe there are trans-dimensional orbs. Maybe there are highly intelligent shades of blue. right? Like credit to Douglas Adams,
Yeah.
one of the most wonderful science fiction jokes of all time, right? Right? Like, why think that this is simple? The universe is vast, and there might be more than one universe, and there might be more than one timeline, and there might be more than, oh God, like this might be so vast that we're dealing with an all of the above scenario, right? Maybe there are things in the bottom of the ocean who built airships to fly over the United States, and there are transdimensional spiritual beings who appear in the sky as orbs sometimes and as stars sometimes. Like, why think that it's not complicated? Again, Occam's razor, skepticism is not believe that the world is simple. Skepticism is remember, at the end of the day, you don't know that the world is simple either. It might be that the world is really, really complicated, and you better not have an assumption which just assumes that the world is simple. Now, yeah, at the end of the day, as you build your theories, you're going to want to build your theories as simple as possible. That's how you can use them, and it's been proven, that it's a productive way to go. But if you never take the complexities seriously, then you'll just get the answers wrong, right? Like what happened in the early 20th century, right? In kind of the late 19th century, early 20th century, there were these physicists who were saying things like, physics is almost done. We basically just have to figure out electromagnetism, and then we're going to be finished, and the physicists won't even have a job anymore. It'll just all be engineering from here on out, because we'll understand the laws of physics, and then we can just build stuff with it. That was said, right, by serious top-level physicists. And then Einstein sat in the post office and thought about what it was like to turn on a flashlight on top of a train, and started doing the Lorentz transformations, and started realizing, oh no, the passage of time can't be the same for all reference frames. There has to be time dilation, and that means there's space dilation, and that means there's mass dilation, and that means mass and energy are the same, and that means that gravity could bend light, and that means that we could probably build a bomb. And then we did. And Einstein was like, shit, maybe I shouldn't have told them, right?
Yeah, this reminded me of the paradigm shift point you made earlier, and I read that Thomas Kuhn book to prep for this. One thing that people should check it out. And I was interested in
revolutions.
Yeah, the history of scientific revolutions. I was also interested in reading about it, that it was quite controversial, that scientists didn't like this idea, that they weren't just gradually increasing the knowledge of the world, but they were moving between these big paradigms when there was just like too much data that they couldn't account for, too many anomalies, basically, and then we have to like switch in these herky-jerky, ontologically shocking ways. There were like 8 different ways I wanted to move from what you just said. One thing is I wanted to talk about the woo and how it's similarly reasonable to imagine that a civilization that's more advanced than ours might have more understanding of woo concepts. In the same way that you would imagine they'd be better at like interstellar flight. So, if there is an astral plane, if telepathy is real and projection, if souls are real, out-of-body stuff, if all that's real, then it's very rational to expect that a more advanced civilization would be more able to control those phenomena.
That's right.
Okay, great. We can move right on from that.
So let me say something about that, right? So this is why I feel equipped to talk about this, right? Because I'm a philosopher of religion. I'm a cross-cultural philosopher of religion. That's my bread and butter, right? And so so then some of these things are angels, are demons, are jinn, are bodhisattvas, are, right? Are avatars, right? Like, okay, wow. So, wow. Like literally these beings that our religious communities have been taking literally for millennia, maybe they were just right. Now, almost certainly they were oversimple, right? And they're like layering on top of that their their own cultural limitations and all that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, I like the bodhisattva term, right? Because bodhisattvas in Buddhism are just these beings who are kind of further along than we are. They're the same kind of things as we are, but they're further along than we are. And they, rather than only pursuing their own enlightenment, they seek to help others attain enlightenment, right? If you use that as a nice broad term, then you could think about angels as bodhisattvas, or you could think about bodhisattvas as angels, or I don't really care about the term.
People use this phrase ascended masters sometimes
Sure, right? Yeah, sure, right. There's various
astral beings, basically.
Yeah, right. And it's like, okay, so yeah, maybe that's right. And I understand how weird it is, how hard it is to start taking seriously the possibility. I mean, I have the benefit of being a person raised in a serious religious community who has taken these kind of spiritual consciousness kinds of issues very seriously from
Mm-hmm.
I have a little bit of a head start, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even I freak out when we look at the Kona Blue stuff, right? So like Harry Reid and friends in Congress, in Senate, tried to create this program called Kona Blue. This was just recently declassified. You can go pull down the PowerPoint presentation that talks about what it was going to be. And it's part UFO recovery program, and it's part psychic telepathy studies, right?
Mm.
And it's like, it is a historical fact that the U.S. government has on many occasions tried to understand psychic phenomena. That is a historical fact. And if you go look at more of the historical fact, go look at some of the serious studies that have been done about remote viewing, psychic communication. There is a real measurable effect. We are bad at it, but it is real and it is measurable. The studies seem to say, and the government has taken seriously. There are programs. Now, okay, I can't say for a fact there are programs, but there have been programs, and we know that Harry Reid tried to kind of bring it under the purview of Congress so that they could see it, right? It's very likely that there are remote viewing programs. How effective are there? Maybe their effectiveness is zero. That would be weird for us to keep investing in it and hiding secrets about it, classifying things about it if the effectiveness is zero. How effective is it? We don't know. Is there an effect? There seems to be. And if you think that's crazy, then you're not looking at the science, right? Go actually look at the science. One of the people who are part of MTI Academics is a graduate student in medicine, and he went down the psychic phenomenon rabbit hole. He was like, I had no idea that there were so many studies and meta studies, and no, really, like by the standards of science, there is a measurable psychic effect.
Yeah, I would point people to Dean Radin's book, Real Magic, which covers a little bit of that. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, and again, this shouldn't surprise us. We already learned, right? The other major revolution of early 20th century physics is quantum mechanics, right? And what did quantum mechanics do? Ill determinism, right? Like we proved with the Bell inequalities that determinism is false. Like we did an experiment. Is determinism true? And the answer came out no, right? Like we've done experiments. Does the world behave the same when it is being observed by a mind and when it's not? And the answer seems to be no. Like there's this very bizarre reality that our minds, our perceptions seem to shape what happens in the physics, right? Okay, well, if that's true, then it's not crazy to think that there are mental phenomena that are not merely phenomenological. They're not merely internal to our subjective experiences. They have some kind of impact on the world. And if there's some kind of impact on the world, then there's no, in principle, reason to believe that we couldn't have communication to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And like down this road, it's very easy to see, like Elon Musk and friends just did this a Neuralink project, right? Where there's lots of people who have been working on this, so I don't want to give Elon credit. Elon gets the credit that Elon deserves, but many other people deserve credit for this science too, right? This kind of brain-computer interfaces. But the reason I talk about Elon's is because there does seem to be some reason to think that Neuralink's product has been more successful in various ways. And it's also literally called telepathy because you put these electrodes inside of people's brains, and then they can think, and then they can move a mouse on a screen. Like that technology exists today. They just did that surgery, several months ago, 6 months ago or so, and it was modestly successful. There's been some problems since. This is not surprising. Okay. But if you imagine that, and there's other technologies that have been developed where you can think words and then they appear on the screen, right? Okay, if you can do that, which we have, then you can do text to speech, and you can send an audio file to somebody else's brain implant, and then you can directly stimulate the auditory nerves, and then they could hear them. Like, it is a tractable, in our lifetime, probably solvable technological problem for me to be able to think a word and for you to actually hear it. So, like, we are already there. Telepathy literally already exists. And so if you think about beings who are, again, millions of years ahead of us, there's just no reason at all to think that they couldn't have highly developed these capacities and be really telepathic. And maybe there are hive minds where the kind of concept of individuality has dissolved. Or maybe there are other communities with different values who said, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to limit our telepathic capacities with each other. We're going to be more like, like Vulcans or something. Like, we can do telepathic stuff, but I got to put my fingers on your noggin. Like, because otherwise we lose our concept of individuality. There might be other societies that were like, screw that. That's too weird. Like, leave my mind alone. Like, our rules in our society are don't do that. Like, why not think that there's a plurality of social, political, cultural variations on this? That there are everything from like unified hive minds down to the like telepathy Luddites who are like, I want to have nothing to do with this telepathy stuff. I'm going to go hang out in the woods with my friends and, we're going to like sing songs and dance, right? Like all of that probably exists.
I want to pick up on the point you made about one of your visible college friends being surprised at how much research there was about psychic phenomena.
Yeah.
And I head us sort of into the last stretch by looping back through one epistemology idea, which I found kind of interesting. Another book I read to prep for you, I learned about this Wason 4-card task, where you like ask people to, it's like a logic puzzle basically. And without going into the details, what I found interesting was they described that if you put sort of like social structures on these cards instead of just like letters and numbers, the people are better at the task. And in general, the finding around this seems to be that like people are not great at logic, and we think we are better than we actually are. But when you apply social structures to these logic puzzles, people get better at it. But I was wondering if you thought maybe that that could have a negative effect if the social structures sort of disincentivize people from coming to the right conclusion. Because the question that I want to get at is, why has it taken us so long to absorb this idea? And why is there still so much resistance, even within the academic community, to acknowledging that any of this research has any merit at all?
Wow. Lots of things to say here. Okay, so one is like the remote viewing stuff, right? So again, there seems to be a measurable but real effect that people can describe where someone else is. Now, most of the remote viewing things are personal in that way, right? Like the remote viewing exercises are like, here's my friend Joe, and Joe's going to go out somewhere. Joe doesn't even know where that is yet, right? Joe's going to pick where to go in like an hour, and then Joe's going to drive someplace and sit there. And then your job as the remote viewer is to describe the place that Joe is going to go sit at, right? I think it's really fascinating that there is a personal connection that seems to be associated with that. Like, I know Joe, and I don't actually know where Joe is, but I might have some kind of connection to Joe that is not local, right? Mm-hmm. Wow, okay, that's weird. Non-local phenomena, spooky distance at an action, or spooky action at a distance, right? Like, yeah. This goes all the way back in all of the history of science, right?
One that pops up in Dean Radin is they've got a measurable effect that people can tell they're being watched, even if the people are watching them like via camera feed, not like standing right behind them, which is super weird and suggests some kind of non-locality.
Yeah, good. Okay, so there's all that stuff. Why are we so hesitant to believe this? I think a lot. I don't know how much. A lot of our inability to believe this stuff that we've been talking about is just good old fashioned denial. Like it's good old fashioned like 5 stages of grief stuff, right? Like there's something really threatening about something scary, something traumatizing about believing that we are not the most intelligent beings in the universe. The human race, the human species, has defined itself as the pinnacle of evolution. Well, man, we're going to have a bad day when we find out we're not, right? And so It's
going to be worse than heliocentrism.
Yeah. Right. It's like much worse than that. Like finding out that death occurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when your pet dies, or for heaven's sake, if you don't have pets, one of the reasons why all children should have pets is so they can experience death in a lower stake scenario than when their beloved fellow humans die first, right? Get some fish for your kids so that they die, and then they have to cry about a fish so that they're better prepared when grandma dies, right? Okay, anyway, just a little bit.
So maybe AI can help us with this, because we'll get used to this idea that something's smarter than us, and then we'll transition seamlessly.
Look, I do not think it is an accident that all of these things are happening at once. I don't know what all the correlations are. Sorry, I don't know what the structure, the causal explanations are, but there does seem to be correlation, right? Yeah, good enough. Okay, so look, it's going to be a bad day for humans when we realize, actually, all things considered, we're pretty dumb. We're actually not that capable, right? That's one thing. Here's another thing. If I told you right now, hey, I actually can read your mind transparently. I can know everything you've ever done. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, transparent, open in a weird way,
and
we never had felt.
Scared.
Yeah, helpless
and ashamed. I don't want you to know my dark secrets. They're my dark secrets. I wish I didn't have them, but I do. And so do you, and so do all of us. The idea of mental transparency is a threat. We don't want to believe that. Our whole concept of individuality is at stake, especially as Americans who have defined ourselves with this rugged individualism. To some extent, people like the Buddhists are going to be much better off than we are, because they've been like, Anatman, no self, for thousands of years. They're way ahead of us, right? Like, if you think about yourself as what I am is this tower of impenetrable individuality, and then I tell you, actually, that idea that you had when you were doing the art direction for Star Trek about warp drives, you didn't actually create that. That was part of the Society of Prime Directive Preparation under the ocean, like feeding you a little thought at exactly the right moment so that you would create Star Trek, so that people like Steve can watch it growing up and be ready for when the Enterprise shows up, right? Or not the Enterprise, because the Enterprise is, of course, an Earth vessel. When the Romulans show up or the Vulcans show up or whatever, right? Like, look, I'm telling you, and you know, one of the questions that you was kind of in your initial thing we didn't talk about much, it for me personally, is like, how are you doing? Well, let me tell you, when you start taking seriously the possibility that there are, I don't even know how many beings who have telepathic capacities, that will get into your head, literally. And you have to start wondering, how much of my ideas are actually mine? How, like that thing that all creative people say, I didn't write the song, the song came to me. The muse, I was inspired. Like, what is that? Are we like tapping into some larger consciousness thing? Many people have suggested that. Maybe that's literally true. Maybe my concept of individuality is just not really understanding the ways that we are fundamentally interconnected, says Hinduism, since way before everybody else, right? Like, there is fundamentally one self, Brahman.
Yeah.
We're all either identical to it, or an aspect of it, or like a part of it, or a whatever, right? Like, maybe pantheism is true, maybe panentheism is true, maybe there is some kind of transcendent deity mind, and maybe it like embodies us, or maybe we are all literally it, right? Like, okay, we really need to expand not only our scientific imagination, but, for lack of a better word, our theological imagination.
maybe past lives are real. Maybe there's actually sort of an ascendance of enlightenment that you can go through. Maybe beings on Earth come from multiple places and souls pass throughout the universe with ease.
That's right.
It's a borderline overwhelming. I also wanted to
borderline overwhelming.
Just think this idea that it's sorry
order.
Yeah, it's fully overwhelming. And I wanted to mention that as ontologically shocking as this all has already been, there still exist possibilities out there that it could be even more destabilizing. Like if we were to find out that, as you have sort of mentioned in a few places, that there was some kind of seeding or interaction going on over the past like several thousand or several million years, maybe our understanding of evolution will change and evolve. And I think that would be equally destabilizing to recognizing that there are more intelligent beings, recognizing that they might have been actively involved in our evolution would be weird. And as Dolan has pointed out in a few places, something like half of encounter experiences involve beings who look kind of human. And that's like pretty shocking. It either suggests some like really deep form of convergent evolution that we don't understand just yet, like this is a really common form factor, or it suggests that there's some kind of like relationship evolutionarily, biologically, that is going to blow our minds the more we learn about it.
Which is funny because if you think about it, now I think to really pull off this speculative thing I'm about to say, you do need faster than light travel, right? Mm-hmm. But if you had faster than light travel, well, do you? No, you don't. Actually, you can still do it. You can still do it slower than light, right? So let's say you have a ship that can get you close enough to the speed of light. We'll keep it relativistic, but not superluminal. You could do something like do some genetic engineering on a planet, get in your flying saucer, travel 1,000 light years. For you, it takes an hour. You do some genetic engineering over there. You get back in your ship and you fly back. And it's 2,000 years later on the first planet. So you can do an edit and then come back 2,000 years and do the next edit. And depending on how fast you go and how big the loop is, you can skip arbitrary amounts of time, right? Mm-hmm. Now, do we have
these herky-jerky moments in evolution where big leaps happen and we don't fully understand why? I think maybe you mentioned that in an interview.
Yeah, that's right. Because herky-jerky moments have a name. It's called punctuated equilibrium, right? Like if you look at the history of evolution, it is not linear. It's herky-jerky. It seems stable, and then it jumps, and it's stable, and then it jumps. And one of the facts of evolution is that happens. Evolution is not linear. It comes and fits and starts. Now, can that be explained without engineering and an intervention from outside beings? I don't know. Maybe, but it's compatible with it being intervention from outlying beings. And again, like, let's look at our religious history. Let's look at my religious history. Genesis 1, in the beginning, the Spirit of God hovered above the waters. Now, look, once you start taking this stuff seriously, and you go back and you read that for the first time, which happens to me in the summer of 2023, like, it'll fry your little mind. Because you're like, okay, wait a minute. Is this a terraforming project? Mm. Because if you actually read the text again, after opening the possibilities a little further, after taking seriously the possibility that David Grush might be true, Genesis sounds like terraforming, not the creation of the universe. It doesn't. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the creation of everything. Mm. But everything after that sounds like terraforming.
That is really fun and fascinating. And as we head toward an outro, I'd kind of like to focus on what should we do about this now from our current position of understanding, having gone to these depths. Where should we take this? And I wanted to float one idea for you that came up when I was writing these questions. While we're pressuring our government to tell us more of what they know, and while we're researching scientifically to the extent we can, do you think we should try to make public contact? Would that be a project that was worth collective attention, academically, scientifically, culturally?
I need to pause for just a moment and tell you how much I love you. This has been an amazing interview. It has been so fun to talk to you. You do, I don't know, you've really done your homework and you're asking incredibly sharp and insightful questions. And I just want you to hear that. And I want your listeners to hear that, because you are a very bright and thoughtful person.
Thank you, man. I've been really excited to talk to you.
Okay. So sorry, but now that I've like bromanced you, can you just ask me that question again?
Let's see. I wrote a version out here. So, let's see. Do you think it's valuable? How centrally should we? Whether?
Oh, should we?
Do you think we need a civilian? Sorry. Do you want to go ahead?
I got it now. Sorry.
Okay. Just to formulate it formally, do you think we need a civilian movement to craft messages and methods for first public contact? Do you have instincts about what that could look like?
Yes. All of this stuff that we're doing in DC, like, oh God, we have to pass the UAP Disclosure Act. That means that we need to get the House and the Senate to agree, and the House and the Senate don't agree. And that means we have to get Mike Turner on board. And Mike Turner, who represents Dayton, Ohio, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and seems to be literally in the pocket, not literally in the pocket. I should use literally.
Figuratively in the pocket.
Figuratively in the pocket of the aerospace industry. He was described by some as the most corrupt person in Congress. Please go look up Mike Turner if you are in Dayton's. He married a lobbyist, and oh God, it's a mess. Okay. So do we have to do all that? And maybe we do. Maybe it's important for us to get our shit together and like hold our government responsible for something, and actually use the people's branch of the government, which is the legislative branch, and let's actually get the legislative branch to do their job and pay attention to what the executive branch is doing, and let's get this thing done. Or maybe we can just go over their heads. I've really wondered about this. Like, maybe this is the time for us to say, actually, we are the government of planet Earth. And these people, these clowns in Washington, D.C., who are mostly sociopaths, literally, politicians are high on the antisocial spectrum disorder, antisocial personality disorder spectrum. They're high. CEOs and politicians score high. They're literally sociopaths. You have to be a sociopath to be able to lie like politicians do, to be able to shift positions like politicians do. All of them, no party is unique here, right? All of them are chameleons because they're all sociopaths. Do we really want the future of humanity determined by our spies?
No. Hard no.
No. I want the future of humanity done by our grandmothers and our artists and our teachers. Like, those are the people who I want in power, right? Not these sociopaths on the hill. No. Do I really want them in charge of this planet? No. Who do I want in charge of our planet? Us. All of us. What does that mean? A people's movement. What does that look like? We're figuring it out. But man, it's important. And like, let's just set aside the aliens for a minute. Let's just do what we know is happening. AI is coming, and it's coming fast, right? Like in the next week, any day, they might release early versions of GPT-5. Any day, they might do that. We know they have it. We know it's orders of magnitude more powerful than GPT-4, right? We know that is true. We know that there are high-level humanoid robot programs already. Please go watch the OpenAI Figure 1 whatever demonstration where there's a person just talking to a humanoid robot, and it like sorts things and puts the dishes while it's chatting with you. Like, go watch that. We are right around the corner from being able to build labor that is more effective than all human labor. And I mean all. Every single task which we use to drive our economy right now, all of them are about to be automatable. And that means that we will see unemployment at a level that has never existed before, all at once. It's going to happen. It is inevitable. It is only a matter of time, and we don't have much time. And do we want the 1%ers in charge of the future. No, we don't. The whole economy right now says you will starve to death if you don't have a job. Is that because there's not enough food? No, we are so good at food. We can make so much food, way more food than we need to. The hunger problem is not a scarcity problem. It's a distribution problem, right? Right now, if you don't have a job, you literally die. You can't pay for food. You can't pay for healthcare. You can't pay for... Is that because of its scarcity? No. It's because of the choices that we have made about how to structure our society. Now, look, that's definitely about to break. Fundamentally break. We need to fundamentally reboot the economy. Simultaneously, why don't we fundamentally reboot the political system? Because the political system is insanely broken. Congress, the people's body in the United States, is utterly ineffective. It can basically do nothing. It's just one big toxic stalemate. Okay, so that's not good. So we got to reboot the economy. We got to reboot politics. We have to figure out who we are in a world with AI. And while we're at it, we might as well figure out where we might be in a world full of beings who have more capacities than us. Because like you said, there's at least one of them, ChatGPT, that's right on the way. Any day. And then there's these other beings that seem to be around and seem to have been here for at least decades, probably centuries, probably millennia, and maybe since the beginning. What is this? What is this moment? It is a political moment. Do we need a people's movement so that we can engage the star nations? Yeah, we do.
Love that. Aspirational, big picture. Hopefully they can help us overhaul our energy infrastructure while we're at it.
That'd be great. I'm going to be so mad if the reason we don't know about this is because we were afraid of destabilizing the petrodollar this whole time.
Oh my God, that would be the worst possible reason. And there are good faith reasons to imagine them not wanting to freak us out.
I agree, there are good faith reasons. Yep.
But this has been wide-ranging and wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing your time. I would love to check in a year or two as the phenomenon unfolds. If you feel like talking again sometime, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
And meanwhile, thank you. Meanwhile, where should people follow you? Where do you like them to tune into your activities?
So the only public-facing thing I have is this little YouTube channel. If you just look up Stephen Brown Philosophy, I think that will get it to you. If you really want to find definitely me, Stephen Brown Philosophy Nazca, because I'm one of the few people talking about the Nazca mummies. And I thank you for not making me talk about the Nazca mummies.
You're welcome.
Most people want to talk to me about that, and that's fine. They're really interesting. It's extremely complicated. If you want to know what I think, you have to go watch 2 videos because I have substantially changed my mind from the first video. This is not because I'm a paid disinformation agent by the U.S. government. It's because I was listening to arguments that seemed interesting and the counter arguments seemed bad. And then I went and I actually talked to people and gathered more data, and the data moved my perspective. This is how rational discourse is supposed to work. And that's what happened. Anyways, go watch both of those videos. If you care about the Nazca mummies, watch the David Grush video. If you want to kind of hear a little bit more of kind of the epistemology stuff and why I think we need to, all of us, especially the people in the U.S., need to be taking the U.S. government stuff seriously. There's some more stuff coming. I'm trying to do some stuff for the New Paradigm Institute. I'm trying to do some stuff with Soul Foundation. I'm trying to do some stuff with the UAP Caucus. I'm trying to do some stuff with UAP Disclosure Fund. So I'm trying to not be. I'm trying to not belong to any one group. I think right now is a terrible time for us to be building little fiefdoms, right? Like, it's time for us to be working together. And thankfully, that seems to be the dominant attitude among the people who are working on this. We're all, there's various little niches that we're tackling, but we're trying to cross-pollinate and share, work with each other. So me specifically, there's my YouTube channel, but please pay attention to Soul Foundation. Please pay attention to New Paradigm Institute. Please read the UAP Disclosure Act. Please watch The Phenomenon. Please go read some Jacques Vallée. Please hug your children. Turn off your devices. Go sit outside and look at the stars more. Go on a walk. Drink some tea. Try to pay attention to your breathing. Go pick up Thich Nhat Hanh's book, which is called How to Sit, and just like practice the discipline of just being a human. Enjoy being a human. Being a human is beautiful. We need to get in touch with what we are, because as we come into contact with at least our AI friends and probably our alien neighbors, then we need to understand what makes humans beautiful. So go figure that out. And go do good human stuff, because that's what we'll be doing from now on anyways.
That's a beautiful way to land it. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. I really appreciate you talking with us today.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.